Hi, welcome back to Christine's Home Affairs. I have an idea in mind today to make a bag from some fairly dull fabric. I have a piece of black upholstery fabric here. It's a nice fabric and they do great for large bags, but I've got so much of this plain fabric that I want to be able to make it look a little bit nicer. And I also have this piece of burgundy fabric or dark red and a piece of red ribbon. So any ribbon will do. I'm going to take you through my thought processes. So get inside my head, it's a scary space. And we'll work out together what we're going to do. I have a little bit of an idea. And once we know what the project dimensions are, then I'll put that up on the screen as well for you. Come along. So the things that we need today are, we need a contrast piece of fabric, the main fabric for the front and back of the bag. We also need some lining, ribbon. I'm using a 1-inch wide ribbon, and we'll need a zip. As we go through the processes of making the bag, we'll know what the dimensions are, but I'll put the measurements up on the screen for you now. So now you guys know the measurements. I know nothing. Let's get started. This piece of fabric is about 10 inches high by about 20 inches long. It's going to be my background fabric for what we're going to do with the ribbon. Okay, the first thing we want to do with our ribbon is cut that into 5-inch strips. I'm just going to fold that over at the 5 inches. These only need to be roughly cut because they're going to be trimmed back later. So 5 inches, we want 10 of those. I've just folded them in half. And then I can snip through. And there I have my 10 ribbon strips. We'll take our fabric and we'll mark a line just down the centre. My ribbon is just over 1 inch wide, so depending on how wide your ribbon is, you want to have your line at least 10 times the width of your ribbon. They're just over 1 inch. I'm going to draw a line about 15 inches in length. That should give me plenty of room. Down the centre. And what we'll do is take our ribbon and we'll go and do this over at the machine rather than setting it up here. You fold your ribbon in half, place the fold over the line and continue to do that until you get to the end. So we're just butting the ribbon up right next to the previous one. With the fabric dimensions that you already know, draw a line straight down the centre and you'll centre the first 2 pieces of ribbon on either side of the centre line and then just work your way out. We're going to just butt them up beside each other, take it to the machine, sew the ribbon down all the way to the end and just stop about 1/2 inch on either side. So rather than pinning this in place, I'll just take them all to the machine and position them in place as I'm going. I'm trying a new camera angle today, so let me know what you think of it. What we're doing here is folding our ribbon in half, and that fold will just sit directly on that chalk line. And we're going to stitch each piece down. Grab the next one and place it right next to it. So you want to butt them up edge to edge. As I'm sewing, I'm watching the chalk line that's coming up rather than the centre of the ribbon. By watching the chalk line, you can actually sew a lot straighter. All right, the ribbon has been stitched in place. What we want to do is take one side of the ribbon and fold that on the stitching line. So we'll fold the first one to the right, the second one will fold to the left and right, and we'll alternate all the way down. You can pin it in place so that you can get an idea of how it's going to look. And there we go, we have a plain piece of fabric that is looking a lot better than it was. Let's take our contrast fabric, and you'll measure the length that you've got across here. My ribbon's slightly over an inch, so I've got 10.5 inches across here. I want to have a little bit of a gap before the next piece of fabric is placed down. So I'm going to have about 1/2 inch on either side of my ribbon. Okay, now what I've done is marked a line 1/2 inch from the edge of the last piece of ribbon on this side and 1/2 inch away from this last piece of ribbon on this side. So just draw a couple of lines across here that are 1/2 inch away from the outside of your ribbon. These lines here, the shortest edge of my ribbon should be 2 inches. So even you can see that there's a couple of different size lengths here. That's just because I rough cut them. But the shortest piece of my ribbon should all be 2 inches. From the center here, we want to measure out 1 3/4 inch from the center out, mark a line there, and from the center out this way, we also want 1 3/4 inch. Our seam allowance for this project is 1/4 inch or 6 millimeters. So that will be our stitching line for the next piece of fabric that's going on here. I need to measure the length from this line here to this line here, and that will give me the length of fabric that I need to cut. So my length of fabric that I will need to cut from the outside line to the other outside line is 12 inches. And then I need to decide how high I want this bag to be. I might do 2.5 inches. So I want a piece that is 12 inches in length by 2.5 inches in height, and we'll have the same for the top and the bottom because this will form the centerpiece of our bag. I have my two 2.5 inch by 12 inch strips of fabric, and what I've also done is marked a secondary line because that's where I need to put my fabric. So from the center line here, we've got 1 3/4 inch, which is our stitching line, and from the center line out to the outside line is 2 inches, and that's the positioning of our fabric. Take your piece of fabric and place that right on that very edge of the outside line, and you can pin that in place. I've secured all of those strips of ribbon in place and lined that up along that outside drawn line. Grab your other piece of fabric and we'll do the same thing. Line that up on the outside line and then pin all those layers of ribbon and fabric together. Now we can go to the machine. We're going to sew 1/4 inch all the way along this outside edge and again along the outside edge here. Once we've done that, we can open this out, press it down, and we'll do a 1/8 inch top stitch all the way to secure those layers of fabric. We'll backstitch at the beginning and the end, and remember it's 1/4 inch seam all the way to the end. And don't forget to move your pins as you come up to them. And we'll do exactly the same for the other side. Now you can see we have the ribbon crisscrossing. It's all nice and secure and it doesn't look too bad, does it? What we can do now is top stitch both layers of this fabric on the outside here all the way along. And then you can turn around and come up or down the other side. With the 2 red strips in place, you want to now measure the distance from the outside edges of the red strips. That measures 7.5 inches, and we also want to cut them at 2.5 inches wide. Now we can place our 7.5 inch by 2.5 inch strips on either side of the fabric here to make a nice red framed square around all of those ribbon pieces. We can take that to the machine now, stitch that in place, then we'll fold the fabric out and top stitch 1/8 inch from the edge. Remember to back stitch at the beginning and the end and to remove any pins that you might have in the way. And then we can open it out and do the top stitching 1/8 inch from that fold line. Now whilst I'm here, I'm going to just secure the outer edges of the fabric all in place to the background fabric Then later on when I'm putting the bag together, it's not going to skew. Okay, that is now the front of our bag completed. So we've now turned a couple of pieces of bland fabric into something a little bit more exciting. We're going to square this up. From here we will know exactly what size we need to cut our lining and our back piece of fabric to complete this bag. This now measures 16 inches across and 8 inches down. So I'm going to square it up so that it's nice and even all the way around. And when I square it up, I'm going to take my measurement. I'm going to line up the straight edge of my ruler on the straight edge of this inside piece of fabric. So I've got a line going along here, which you can't see because I'm using a red ruler on red fabric, but imagine you know it's there. I've got my 2-inch line going across the edge of the fabric there, and I've got some excess fabric along here. I'm going to trim that off all the way along, and just make sure that you've got that line and the end line lined up at the 2-inch mark so that you can cut off that excess. And we're going to do the same all the way around. Because all of our strips are the same size, we're going to make them nice and even all the way. So again, we'll line up our 2-inch line on the edge of the fabric here and measure out 2 inches. And repeat that for the last 2 sides. What you want to do now is measure the finished length and the finished width or height of your fabric. And in the last few seconds, I've had another idea. I don't like that this is just a long, narrow bag. I'd like to give myself options. So I'm going to put a black fabric at the bottom, and that will form the base of our bag so that we can have some boxed corners. And I think the addition of the extra black will help bring this out too. So we now know that the back piece of fabric needs to be 15.5 inches in length by 7.5 inches in height. So we'll cut a piece of fabric for the back at the same size. And because I want to have a contrast fabric, which is quite funny really, I'm trying to dress up some boring fabric and I'm going to add some more to it. But it'll give a nice contrast. Cut a strip that is, what did I say, 15.5 inches wide by 5 inches in length. And that will actually be the base for our bag. So that will sit underneath like that on both sides. And just provide a little bit of contrast. I'll be using a black zip for this. We'll go and cut out our back piece. Okay, we have our back piece and our front piece. And we also have the base of our bag as well. Take the base section, pin that to one side of your fabric, and we can sew that 1/4 inch all the way. And then we've got to come out and top stitch. Now when you top stitch this piece, I'll change my thread to a black, and I'm going to top stitch to the black instead of to the burgundy. And the reason for that is there are so many layers of fabric in here now from the black and the burgundy that I've got originally. I want those to be on the black side. If we have them on the burgundy side, we're going to end up with about 6 or 7 layers of fabric. So when we top stitch to that contrast fabric. Take your other piece of fabric as well. We can do these at the machine at the same time. So take your back piece and place that on the other side of the base. Pin that in place as well, and we can go and do both sides at the same time. So that will be our finished bottom in the bag there, and we'll top stitch down both long edges. So what are your thoughts on this project so far? I'm kind of liking the concept. I'm thinking though that I probably should have done the same thing on the back piece of fabric as I've done on the front. So I've changed my thread to the black, and you can see that seam here. I'm going to make sure that folds over to the black side. And I'll do the same for the other side. Make sure both seams fold into the black section. It's funny, now that I've put that contrast piece of fabric on there, I'm not sure that I like it, but I think it will be fine once I've put the same colour zip at the top. It'll all tie everything in together. This now measures 15.5 inches by 19.25 or 19.5 inches. And we now need to cut some lining. Fold the entire project in half. Oh, I like that side. I really like that side. Okay, fold the fabric in half. We've got our fold at the bottom, raw edges around the top and sides. We want to take a measurement now so that we can work out what size lining we need. From the top to the bottom is 9.5 inches, and this should be 15.5. So we now need to have lining that is as big as this piece of fabric, twice, but we also need to add our seam allowance. So we've got 9.5 inches going down. We'll add 1/4 inch to the bottom of that, so that will be 9 3/4. We need to have 2 lining pieces, 9 3/4 by 15.5 inches. This piece of fabric must have been a bed sheet in its previous life. I'll try and get the fabric I need out of this piece. Okay, my lining pieces are ready. They are 15.5 inches by 9 3/4. That means it is just slightly longer than the height of the finished bag. Now I'm going to cheat again, as I usually do. I'm going to place the right sides of my lining together, and this will be the bottom section. So I've got lining right side together. I've kept an opening at the bottom here, and I'm going to sew from the outside in. I'll do a back stitch at the beginning and the end on both sides, and this will be the opening for the bottom of our bag. So I'll quickly go and do that now, and I'll be right back. So, did you miss me? Open it out, and you can see there's an opening at the bottom here. This is just a quicker way of doing the bottom of your bag. Now you can press your seams open if you want to, or press them to one side. What I'm going to do is press the seam to one side. So I've done that along here, and then I'll do the same in the opposite direction. Then you can get your fingers in there and open up that little section there and just finger press it down. It'll create a nice fold for you, which will make it a lot easier for you to close up the bag after. So now we should have our lining piece and our main piece at the same size. And that looks about right to me. Now it's time for the zip. So we know our fabric is 15.5 inches in width. We have 1/4 inch seam allowance on either side, which brings that down to 15 inches. And then we want to add a tab as well. So our zip is going to be 14 inches finished. I'm going to be using a 14-inch continuous zip. If you don't have access to those, then you can use a regular dress zip, as long as it's 14 inches at least. We can always trim it back. If you're using a regular zip, open the slide out, pinch the edges of the end of your zip together and just run some tape along there, and then you can cut off these metal teeth. All right, I'm not going to do that because I've already got my zip ready, but you've seen it in other videos before. You just cut that off, and then we'll put our tab on. We want our tab to be at least the width of our zip and at least 3 inches in length. We can cut that down as well. So this one is 3.5 inches in length. And what you want to do, take the fabric that you're using for your tab and place that right side together. So if we were using a fabric that had a print on one side and that was the wrong side, you would take the right sides, fold those together and place the end of your zip inside the layers of your fabric. Okay, so you want the right sides folded together. So I'll take my black fabric, place that over the end, and I'll sew that in place at the end there, about 1/4 of an inch or so in, and on the other side I'll do the same thing. If you're using a continuous zip, make sure you've got your slide on here somewhere. So if you're using your regular zip, you'll cut off the metal tab, place that fabric on the end and stitch it down. And then once you've done that, come back to this side and you'll do the same thing. You'll cut the metal tab off this side and put your other tab on that end as well. So you'll cut your zip down to 14 inches. I'll quickly take this to the machine and sew those ends up. Okay, the tabs are on. All you need to do is fold the fabric away from the zip now, and that is your finished tab for the top of your bag. Now we can place our zip and our bag together. Take the curved edge of your slider and have that facing toward your left. I'm going to use some double-sided tape. I'm often asked about this double-sided tape, whether it gums up my needles. The answer is no, and the reason for that is that I'm using one that's specific for sewing. If you just go and use a double-sided tape that's just general craft tape, it will end up gumming your needles up. This one here is a So Easy brand. It's a quilter's tape, and it's actually a washout tape as well. So if I hit that with water, it would just dissolve. So I've run my tape along the top there. I've got the curved edge of my zip facing to my left, and the reason for that is that's the side that opens my bag. So most people open their zips from left to right. Now we'll face that placed down, and we'll centre that evenly across the fabric. You can see my tabs are a lot longer than the fabric. I do that intentionally so that I don't have to think. And I'm just going to eyeball the tabs and make sure I've got that roughly the same distance on both sides. You can measure that if you like. And then just secure that in place all the way from end to end. We need to attach our lining, so I'll run another strip of tape along the top edge of that zip, and then I'll take my lining fabric and place that directly over the top. Line up the side sections as well. With the zip in place, we're going to take this to the machine now, sew all the way down the end, and then when we've finished that, we're going to top stitch from the end of the zipper tape all the way down to the other end of the zipper tape and not beyond that. The reason for that is that when we put our bag together at the end, it helps us manipulate the fabric a lot more easily when we're putting the ends of the bag together. When we put the zip in, we want to have the main fabric or the outer fabric faced up and have the lining facing the bed of the machine. Don't forget to move your zip slider out of the way when you get to it. Now we can top stitch. You want to make sure that the lining is sitting underneath the main fabric. We're starting our sewing at the end of our zip, not at the end of the tab. And remember to put a matching thread on top as well. Now we can put the double-sided tape on the other side of our bag. And we're going to line up the side edges of the main fabric with the side edges that we're coming up to. And that will centre everything nicely. Then you can press it all down. Once that's pressed in place, put another row of tape along the zip. Bring the lining up and line up the side edges and then press it down at the top. And we can take this back to the machine. We'll do it with the main fabric faced up again. Once that's done, open the zip, and then we've got to get in and do that last row of top stitching. It'll be a little bit awkward at that point too. Okay, let's start again. Okay, we've inserted the zip and now we need to top stitch this side here. It's a little bit awkward to do that from this position here. I'm going to turn the bag inside out and open the zip all the way. This is the outside of my fabric and this is the lining. You want to make sure your lining is underneath your main fabric, and you just want to get in and manipulate the fabric so that your lining is under the main, like that. So this is the most awkward part here. And as you sew, you can just go all the way to the end, and it'll be a little bit fiddly down there as well. Remember, I'm starting at the end of the zip, not at the end of the bag. When you get to the end, you've just got to bring that bag forward and spread out the fabric so that you can get in and finish that last bit of stitching. Do we want some tabs on the end of this bag or not? I haven't actually considered that. Maybe we will. No, I can't be bothered. Just if you want to put tabs on them, you'll put them on at this point here. You'll only stitch them onto one layer of the fabric, not on the lining, and one on either side. I'm not going to do that for this bag. I'm just too lazy today. We'll turn the lining out and the main inside out, and it's at this point you want to make sure that your zip is open. Now we need to line up the edge of our fabric. So the fold in the fabric just along here, we'll line that up. Then we want to line up the seam along here. And the rest of it you can just manipulate so that it sits nice and flat. And repeat that for the other end. So our fabric has been clipped together on both sides here, and on the edge of the fabric where the tabs are, you want to make sure that these folded edges here match up. Remember, we didn't sew from the end of the zip all the way to the end. By not doing that means that we haven't secured all these layers of fabric down right here, which would give you 2, 4, 6, probably about 8 to 10 layers of fabric. Makes it very, very bulky. Because we've actually got some wiggle room here, if it's too bulky, you can open this seam out, have one sitting on the lining and the other one sitting on the main of the fabric. That distributes the bulk much more evenly, and it will help you get over those layers. And you can do the same at the other end. As long as you have the top section of your bag lined up, it'll be okay to fold that seam open. And you can't do that when you top stitch all the way to the end. Let's go to the machine and we'll sew that and that. I like to triple stitch where my zipper tabs are, and then we'll work the boxing. We already have our opening ready for the end of the bag. Remember, we've got a 1/4 of an inch seam all the way. I use a screwdriver to hold that fabric in place because it's at my machine all the time. I'm constantly changing needles and changing sewing machine feet. It's been a great little handy tool for me. And I'll backstitch in that section. Double check that these seams are going to line up here, and I'll also backstitch over that too. Flip it over and do the other side. Okay, now you can cut off any excess tabs that you may not want, and I'm going to turn this bag the right way around before I decide whether or not I want to box my corners. I don't know if I want them boxed or if I want them curved. I will probably box them, but I do like to have a look first. So what do you think? Should I box the corners, leave them as they are, or should I curve them? I definitely don't think I'll curve them because I've got the fold on the bottom of the fabric and I'd rather not do that. You know that I'm not going to hear you, don't you? So I'm going to go and box these corners. You all get to see how the bag looks with nice corners on the bottom of the bag, and then you can decide for yourself if you want to have a nice flat bag or if you want to have boxed corners. Let's go and turn this the wrong way around again. All right, we've got the bag the wrong way around. I've decided I'm going to do a very small box corner. So I don't want the bag to end up having too big a taper when I do the boxing. So all I'm going to do is a 1/2 inch. I'm going to measure a 1/2 inch from the stitching line. And from the bottom edge. If I'm not happy with the boxing, if I think it's too small, I can always turn this the right way around, have a look at it, see what I think, and then I can come back and make it bigger if I need to. But if I go too big and don't like it, I can't do anything about it. So I'm going to start off small. I think I'll be happy with just a 1/2 inch. That will give me 1 inch across the bottom anyway. So on the fold there, so the 1 inch measurement is from the stitching line and from the fold. And we'll do the same for the lining. For the lining, we take the measurement from both stitching lines. And that will give us a 1 inch boxed corner at the bottom. So once you've cut out those corners, take your main and fold that out and line up your side seam with the center of that fabric. And we'll go to the machine and sew across there. Do that on all 4 of your corners. Okay, let's sew those closed. On the main fabric, I always like to double stitch those. The lining is fine to be single stitched. People are often very confused by boxed corners. The best way to kind of think about how it works is that if you cut a 1 inch box, then you're going to reduce the height of your bag by 1 inch. It'll give you 2 inches across the base, but you'll lose 1 inch in height. So that's all you've got to remember is if it's a 1/2 inch boxed corner that you cut out, you lose 1/2 inch of height. It's as simple as that. So you lose whatever you cut in your boxing is what you lose in height, but what you gain across the base is double what you've cut out for your boxing. Let's turn this the right way around and see how it looks. And if you're happy with how it looks, we'll take the inside lining back to the machine and sew that closed. Because we've already trained the fabric with those creases we made earlier, it sits underneath really nicely. You can just go and sew that closed. I'll do that now. And there we have our finished bag. So what we have down the bottom here is a 1 inch base because of the 2 1/2 inch boxed corners. The side seam has matched up nicely on this side, not as nicely on the other side, but I can live with that. And then we've got our zipper tabs nice and neat along the top edge there. What do you think? So there we go. We have transformed 2 bland pieces of fabric into something a little bit more elegant and fun, I think. I didn't really know what I was doing to begin with. Well, let's be honest, I had no idea what I was doing to begin with. All I had envisioned was to do this with the ribbon at the front of something. Anyway, let me know what your thoughts are. I hope you've enjoyed this video and I shall catch you next time. Bye for now.